You're listening to Trek FM.
Welcome to From There to Here, Trek FM's 50th Anniversary Star Trek Rewatch. We're going through all 729 Star Trek adventures from Enterprise to Star Trek Beyond and everything in between. I'm Zach Moore, and I'm joined today by...
Brandon Mutala. Zach, you need a shave. It's like you haven't shaved in 20 years.
Yes, very good. Very good, Brandon. Nice to talk to you again today. We're talking about 2 episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Rules of Engagement, and Hard Time. So let's jump into it. Much to say today. Let's jump right into it. Rules of Engagement. In this episode, the Klingons try to extradite Worf after he accidentally destroys a transport full of Klingon civilians. So, Brandon, what did you think about Rules of Engagement? Not to be confused with the David Spade sitcom by the same name.
I am not aware of that sitcom, but...
it's Patrick Warburton. It's funny stuff. Putty from Seinfeld. But anyway... Be that as it may, Rules of Engagement, Brandon, what are your thoughts?
I think that LeVar Burton directed this episode, and he did an absolutely phenomenal job with this episode. I really like it because it's hard to do courtroom drama episodes, and the way that he did it with the directing and their testimony, and how they would be like on the location of the ship and talking to the camera, I really liked that. I thought it was really cool.
Very bizarre, right? And I wondered, was this in the script? Or was this something LeVar Burton decided to do directorially? I'd be interested to know. I feel like it might have been in the script because, there's dialogue and like, as you said, to the camera. It almost feels like a commercial or something, right? Where they they break the fourth wall and look right at you and tell their story. I think it's the only instance we see of this in Star Trek, so it's very unique. Very unique.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think it's really cool. The opening for this episode is pretty awesome as well. Now, we were just talking yesterday about how Voyager's notorious for really short intros, and this episode actually has a fairly short intro, but I think it works because, Worf just has this dream right at the beginning, and he wakes up in the cell, and Oda's like, okay, well, your trial starts right away, and it's like, oh, what's going on here? But it's cool. I mean, it's one of those tropes where, like, right at the end of the episode, you get the miraculous pad with the solution to your problem, and how it didn't really happen, and the Klingons are being their traditional Klingons of being completely non-honorable and lying and blah blah blah, and anyways.
Well, it's a courtroom drama in grand Star Trek tradition. The Klingon advocate, played by Ron Canada, is a great character actor. I liked him a lot. I think he was very good as a Klingon. It's nice to see... Yeah, there you go. That's his name. It's nice to see these other aspects of Klingon society, which we don't often get. Everybody's a warrior, this or that. And he's a lawyer, But even he approaches, at the trial like a battle. He's talking to Sisko, and he tells him, the truth must be won. It's a very Klingon philosophy. So I like that a lot from him.
What's his name?
Ron Canada.
Well, that's a great last name.
I don't know if he's Canadian. I mean, that would be odd. It's like, is that a common name up north?
Yeah,
is anybody's last? Do you know anyone's last name?
My real last name is Brandon, Saskatchewan.
He was in this actor. He was in the Masterpiece Society. He was the number 2 guy on that. Masterpiece Society. Yeah. So anyway, the stickler. But yeah, this is a good episode. Did you notice that Worf is wearing his sash at the first hearing, and then after that he's not anymore with the dress uniform? Did you notice that?
I didn't.
Well, I think why they took it off was when Worf wears his sash, you don't see his ranking pips. And maybe like they filmed that first scene, you're like, oh, you know what? We don't see his rank. Let's take it off. Let's not use it. So I just thought that was interesting. And another thing I'm being like a nitpicker here, but hey, that's what we're here to do, point things out. If you look closely, I'm not sure which parts of it, I'm not sure which parts of the trial this happens in, but there are several shots where Sisko only has 3 pips on his dress uniform instead of 4. So they pulled out his season 3 dress uniform instead of season 4. But anyway, enough about that wardrobe minutia, Brandon. Anything? What other thoughts do you have on Rules of Engagement?
it's a really fun episode to watch. I don't think that there's a lot of in-depth discussion that we can have on it. There's no moral really for this episode. It's fun to watch. It's well directed, and I recommend it on a rewatch. But beyond that, I don't think there's much I have to say.
I do think it does tap into a little bit of, everybody makes fun of Worf for being like the whole fire first, attack first guy. And this actually does explore that in a way, because he got in trouble because he basically just fired on a ship without identifying it. And Sisko tells him that you're damn right you should have checked. He really dresses him down at the end. Even though he's supporting Worf this whole time, it is made clear, like, look, Worf, you learn from this experience. It'll make you a better commander in the long run. But you have a very short fuse, and as we saw in the courtroom itself, he attacks Ron Canada. So not good for your case if you attack your prosecutor, right?
Yeah. See, like I've personally had a lot of issues with that in my life, where it's like it feels good to, like I'm with my verbal, like if somebody's putting me and painted me in a corner and whatnot, like I'll attack verbally and I'll say a lot of bad things, and it's like it feels good to get those things out there, and it's like, I showed you, but then it's just like, well, you look like the fool because you've just lashed out, right? So like verbally, that's something that I've had to struggle with in work situations and stuff, and I've had a lot of conflict in my jobs and stuff because of that. So I can totally relate to what Worf goes through in this episode very well. So there's a little bit of information about Brandon.
There it is, and it taps into, this episode taps into the overarching story arc right now in Deep Space Nine, which is the conflict with the Klingons. It taps into that, which is great because there's plenty of story potential there, and the fourth season of Deep Space Nine definitely takes advantage of it.
Yeah. And the last line that Sisko says there, when he says, smile when it's the last thing that you want to do because it keeps the troops happy. Like that's an interesting concept because, as a store manager, I would do things like that too, where it's like, they want to get together and whatnot. And that's the last thing that I wanted to do. But it's like, well, we got to build morale for the team, right? So we got to get together every once in a while. So
it's mark a good leadership. Sisko really portrays a lot of good leadership qualities in this episode, and that's definitely one of them.
Yeah, he's my favorite captain.
Moving on to our next episode, Brandon, Hard Time. In our annual installment of Torture O'Brien.
O'Brien must suffer.
In this episode, convicted of espionage, Miles O'Brien is giving the memories of 20 years in prison in a matter of hours. Returning to Deep Space Nine, O'Brien finds he cannot shrug the memory of his awful experience or rid himself of the guilt he feels over the death of his cellmate.
Yeah, this is a very, very, very powerful episode, and it's a very good episode. Like it's really, really good, and it's kind of hard to watch because it makes you think about our prison systems and stuff, and like what is a good type of prison system, like do you lock them up or whatnot? Because a lot of people say when you lock people up, it makes them better criminals by spending time in jail. They learn things in jail, and what's a fair punishment, and like how do you determine these things? Like leaving for good behavior and things like that. I mean, like what's that recent case where that young swimmer like raped a girl, and he ended up only getting like 6 months, and he was out because of good behavior, and it's like, nothing is fair in our judicial system, but is this a fair punishment for O'Brien? Like for something for espionage. It didn't happen. He didn't lose 20 years of his life, but it's affected him drastically, and it's going to completely change his personality. And you see that when he comes back. Like he's not the same person. He's an angry individual. He's yelling at his wife and daughter, and he's, breaking Quark's arm, and, like he's a very, very different individual, and he's very angry and frustrated when he gets back, and he doesn't know how to handle it. And I can only imagine, like, I don't know anybody who's been to jail and come out, so I don't have any experience with that, but I can just imagine that that's the kind of thing that would happen with people when they get out of jail as well,
Yeah, I put a lot of the success of this episode on Colm Meaney, because a lesser actor could not have portrayed this. It's really easy to overdo it or overact, and he's like this angry guy, but you really feel his struggle because he goes through the whole gauntlet of emotions in this episode. He's crying. He gets suicidal at a point, which Richard and I had talked about this in our blog previously. I don't know what was in the water at Paramount these few months, but there's a lot of suicide themes and a lot of in this stretch of episodes here. We talked about in Death Wish and as well as, Sons of Moog and Life Signs, and here we are again. And suicide is serious stuff. And O'Brien, really, he feels like he's at the end of his rope there, and Bashir has to talk him down. He works through his own personal demons. And, his friend, what was his friend's name again?
Echar,
right? Echar. I keep thinking Esau, from the Bible, but the Echar. It's always a kind of a goofy sci-fi fantasy cliche when you imagine seeing another person, like, in like the Spider-Man movies where Harry Osborn sees Norman Osborn. Like, well, he's not really seeing him there. Like, is that really even a thing? But because these memories were implanted into O'Brien's brain, like, to me, that I totally buy it, because that's, it's all warped into his mind. So that he really would be seeing someone, because for in his mind 20 years that had been processed in his brain. So that conceit of sci-fi I usually don't like. I actually thought it worked here. And man, killing his cellmate like that, powerful stuff, right?
Yeah, like that, the guy that played him, like, that's such a cool character, that Echar, and I don't know, like, it's a very powerful episode, and it moves me every time I watch it. Like that scene at the end, like you were just talking about, when O'Brien is attempting suicide, and he's talking to Bashir about it, and just all the stuff that he went through, but he didn't go through it. And it's like, it's a mind-boggling thing. Like, what if our society came to this point and did something like this?
Well, yeah. What do you think about that, Brandon? Like, do you think that's the more effective way to punish people? Because you save. I can totally understand why a society would turn to that if they had the technology, because they don't have to pay for the housing and the food and like all of the, because a big criticism of our prison system and our societies are like all the resources we have to devote to these criminals for years and years and years and years. If you could just plug somebody into a computer for an hour and they get their quote unquote punishment, and then unplug them, and then hopefully they've they come out better. I mean, I could totally see society making a decision.
See, but the question with that is, what has been implanted into his memory, and what is O'Brien working with the memory? Like, so did these people implant O'Brien killing this guy, or did they implant O'Brien and this guy sharing a cell, and somehow fast forward 20 years of imprisonment in however long it took to do it? Like, so did O'Brien's brain make these decisions in this rapid format, or was all of this put into his brain? And so they don't explore that, and they don't actually say what happened, right?
Right, because I wonder, does everybody have an Echar? Is that part of the program? Right? I mean, that's...
Yeah, exactly. So, it goes back to that Voyager episode of Ex Post Facto, right, where Tom Paris is convicted of killing that guy, and so they implant the memory of his death over and over and over in his mind, right? So that's the society's punishment, is that he's got to relive killing his, but like from the point of view of the victim, so being killed by Tom Paris every 16 hours or whatever it is. So it's similar to that, but it's instead it's a prison sentence. And yeah, does everybody have an Echar, or is Echar only for O'Brien? See, for me, I would think that everybody would have an Echar-like person. But then again, so do they implant that, at the end of it all, you're going to kill this guy? And it's, I don't know, like, that's just mind-boggling right there. Like, so if this is something that O'Brien's mind came up with, and it just was like this hollow program that played out in his mind, like, that's one thing. But
Well, and that's what's great about Deep Space Nine, and no other Star Trek show would you hear a character say, we've been taught that we've, evolved past hate and anger, and, we haven't, and that's pretty much flies in the face of the Roddenberry box.
Yeah.
Right. But that's what Deep Space Nine does. It's like, look, it takes people as they are, and that's what's so that's why they can tell such powerful stories. And, in a lot of Star Trek episodes, traumatic things like this happen. Like, look at The Inner Light, right, with Picard. He imagines that he lived a different life for obviously it's a very different experience, right? But he imagines he lived a life for 20 plus, 40 years maybe. And he comes out of it, and, because Next Generation is more episodic, we don't get a follow-up, because he comes out of it at the very end of the episode. And we do see, we get the flute, we get lessons, episodes like that, so there is some follow-up. But in this episode of O'Brien, he gets out of that at the beginning of the episode. So we go through that journey with him, recovering it, because days and weeks pass, and they talk about that in the episode. So I thought that was great, too. It wasn't like, this was at the very end of an episode and I have to wrap it all up in 15 minutes. We got this whole episode was devoted to, the aftermath of something like that, which is, very rare for Star Trek, and great they could delve into that in that way.
Yeah, you got it. And that's one of the things I'm looking forward to with the new show, is you'll be able to expand on these things and take your time and deal with them, because there are ramifications to these actions, And I mean, I wish we would have seen more of this, and it would have taken more than this episode to resolve this situation with O'Brien, because it is such a fascinating concept. And like, I just wish I could go ahead 4 years right now and listen to the mission log on this episode, because it's going to be good.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack in this episode. Every level of it is just so deep, and and I always say about the O'Briens, they're like the most normal family on Star Trek. They're just the most normal guys, and to see O'Brien go home to his wife and his kid, and he kind of lashes out at him, and that's what really pushes him over the edge. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. I think whenever we lash out at like our loved ones, that's what really kind of snaps us out of any kind of negative mood we might be in. Like, whoa, I'm not that person. That's not the person I want to be. And so that's the big trigger for O'Brien in this episode. It's just, we could talk about this episode for hours, So it's just so good, so good.
Yeah. Well, I think that's about all that I want to say about it right now. But like, wow, like this is a very, very good episode. I think it's a very important episode that people definitely need to watch.
Yeah. I wish we could get plugged into a machine and get to talk about this episode for 20 years. Brandon, what about you?
No, it'd be depressing.
Oh man. Well, Brandon, if people want to find you on the internet, where can they find you?
Well, when I'm not in an artificial Agrathi jail cell, you can find me here on the network with new episodes of Melodic Treks, which is all about the music of Star Trek. And you can find me on Twitter at Brandon-Mutala, and every once in a while I poke my head up in the Babel Conference. And Zach, when you're not punching Klingon council lawyers because they've angered you, where can people find you?
Well, they can find me here on the network every week on Standard Orbit, our original series podcast. You can find me personally on Twitter at MoronZach. That's MooreOnZach. And I'm also the host of my own podcast called Always Hold On to Smallville, where we talk about each and every episode of that young Superman show. We're on Twitter at Always Smallville with one S.
And join us again tomorrow as we talk about 2 more episodes of D Space Nine, Shattered Mirror and The Muse.